This weekend, a bunch of photos started to circulate on Twitter. They were originally tweeted out by a radio show host in Tucson, and they depict what looks like some kind of futuristic dystopian refugee camp. Those pictures were allegedly taken right here, right now, in the United States of America. They reportedly show the interior of a Border Patrol-run facility in Nogales, Arizona, which has the capacity to house up to 1,500 immigrant minors, kids who have been detained trying to cross into this country on their own. The Nogales facility is serving as an emergency shelter because the federal government didn't have the capacity to hold these kids near where they originally crossed the border in Texas. That news, coupled with reports of other immigration issues, prompted outrage from Republicans like Arizona Governor Jan Brewer, who called it a crisis of the federal government's creation. Alabama Senator Jeff Sessions, who says there's a crisis at the border and, quote, President Obama is responsible for this calamity. So many unaccompanied children have made the trip to the Southwest United States in recent months, over 47,000 since October, that President Obama last week declared it an urgent humanitarian situation. As bizarre and almost Dickensian as these images of kids warehoused at a detention facility hundreds of miles away from their families and now having to face down this country's immigration bureaucracy all by themselves, as bizarre as that is, this is actually far from the worst-case scenario for these kids because at least 1,300 immigrant children were detained for 3 days or more in adult detention centers as kids from 2008 to 2012, according to research by the National Immigrant Justice Center. They only obtained data for 30 out of the 250 DHS facilities nationwide, so the real number could be much higher. Imagine now what it would take to send your child unaccompanied to the north. What circumstances would push a parent to do that? And now imagine yourself as the person inside the U.S. government bureaucracy, inside DHS, responsible for sorting through these kids and figuring out how to humanely get them back home. Joining me now is Pilar Marrero, immigration reporter for La Opinión. She's author of Killing the American Dream. And Pilar, this is something that has been happening for a while, unaccompanied minors detained. There has been a massive increase of late, am I right?
Yes, this is obviously not a new thing. Unaccompanied minors have been coming, and more often than not, they come here to join parents who are already here, who have been working here for years, many of them undocumented. But in the last few years, we have seen a surge in the numbers of people, and that surge has coincided with an increased level of violence in Central America, because we must say that these are mostly kids from Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala who are coming here. And these three countries, and this you can see it in many reports by the government and by nonprofit organizations. For years, we have known that this crisis was coming. The level of violence, it's also has a lot to do with the gangs that have been deported, the gang members who have been deported from the United States to those countries, and also organized crime that's operating the routes through Mexico to come here to the United States illegally.
So if I'm understanding you, I mean, the way that the Drudge Report, Jan Brewer, Republicans have left on this to basically, I think the charge is that Barack Obama, with his desire to give amnesty, has basically waved a big "send us your kids" sign to the parents of Central America, which has resulted in this. And those images you're seeing, the reported images, those foil blankets are basically those marathon blankets people get after marathons to keep them warm. Those are the threadbare conditions under which these kids in cots are being kept with those blankets. What I'm hearing from you is this is not about the Obama administration pursuing comprehensive immigration reform.
Well, it's not, and these Republicans know this. They're just using the issue for politics, as it usually happens with the immigration issue. The reality is this is a crisis that is the result of policies that have been put forth by both parties, the Democrats and Republicans. And also the lack of immigration reform has allowed for this irregular situation to continue, because if you had laws that actually would regulate certain things, increase some of the quotas. A lot of these kids are just the sons and daughters of workers who are here working in factories. I just talked to one mother today who paid, smugglers to bring her twin daughter and son here a few months ago because she was afraid that they were going to be recruited by the Maras or gangs in El Salvador. This mother was desperate, and she did all she had to do to get these kids here. It cost her thousands of dollars, and she only works in she works in factories. So you may imagine she doesn't really make a lot of money.
So that is a fascinating case. So you have a mother who immigrates in an undocumented fashion to come work in the States.
9 years ago.
Many years ago, she leaves her kids probably in the care of relatives, and then as she sees conditions deteriorate in her home country, she gets so worried that she pays a lot of money to send them up with essentially a kind of chaperone, right? I mean, this is you're paying a smuggler, you're hoping they take care, and then that, under those conditions, that's where you would see an unaccompanied minor possibly being detained.
Yes, that's one, you know, that's a lot of the cases are people who have parents here, but there are some other cases where children come by themselves, like teenagers come by themselves escaping, you know, domestic violence, or there are many different cases, but for the most part, what I've seen, and I've talked to families, several families in this case, these are people who have parents here who are working in our factories, in our fields, and they just want to see their kids safe.
And now the question is how the mammoth American government bureaucracy processes these kids and gets them either back home safely or to their parents safely. And I can't even begin to imagine what that process looks like.
Well, and the thing is, these kids are not allowed to stay here for the most part. Immediately when they get here, they get processed. They're supposed to be a maximum of 72 hours in the hands of the Customs and Border Protection Agency, and then they must be transferred to the hands of the Health and Human Services. They have certain homes where they are sent, or refugee institutions where they are sent. They are approved for these uses, but not right now. They can't keep up with it because of the numbers. But they are put in deportation proceedings for the most part, and they don't, you know, 70% of these kids, 80% of these kids end up having no representation. They can't really make a case for political asylum, and they are sent back. So they're not staying here.
Wow. Pilar Marrero from La Opinión, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Coming up right now, the